Hello, and welcome back to another in our VIC DET webinar series. I am excited to be back on what is a Tuesday afternoon. Is that right? Tuesday?
I think it's August, Kimberly. I think it's August.
I have no idea.
I'm not sure.
On Blur's Day. Live, you're joining us live. Welcome. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and ask any questions that come up throughout the show in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. We always appreciate hearing your input. And Chris and Jim are very, very good at pivoting, which is the word of the month or year, I believe, and being able to adapt if there are specific questions that you have. Tonight, this afternoon, this morning, depending on when you're watching this, we are going to deep dive into Google Classroom. So if you were here with us when we did it live a weekish ago, we did part 1 of Google Classroom. And then if you watched that show, you'll know there was some debate about whether we were coming back with Chris and Jim, and we decided that we would. And thank you very much to everyone who gave us feedback. We will be putting the feedback form up a couple of times again tonight, and it really, really is very important and very powerful for us to get your feedback and hear what you guys have to say and how you'd like us to continue to iterate on this series. So I have talked a lot. I am going to hand over to the wonderful Jim Sill and Chris Hart, who will be talking with you this afternoon about all things Google Classroom. So please do use the chat, ask away, and I will come back at the end of the show. Have fun, everyone.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thanks, Kimberly. Well, Chris, I just have to say before we get started that the feedback keeps us employed. So,
yes.
Well, some of the feedback.
So feel free to lie or whatever, but just remember that our children need bread on the table. So thank you so much for joining us again. My name is Chris Hart, and I work at Unstuck Learning Design, and my very, very good friend here, Jim Sill from Deploy Learning. Before we get on with the meat of today's webinar, we do want to just spend a moment to reflect and to think and to really acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we are meeting today, and to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And for Jim and I, that would be the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. And for you, wherever you are in Victoria, and indeed we know that while these webinars have been designed in conjunction with the Victorian Department of Education, lots of other people have jumped on them, and we're delighted about that. But we'd love you to take the opportunity to reflect on the traditional custodians of your land. And we want to acknowledge you being here today in that very human of ways to share and to be part of knowledge development and knowledge sharing, and hopefully improving some of our professional skills around, in this case, Google Classroom.
That's right, Chris. Thank you for that. You know, a lot of the things we talk about on here, especially at the basic level, you'll find as a resource at this website here, this teachfromhome.google. And it's if you just head over to that website and take a look, there's so many places to get started if you're just getting started with using Google tools. And even if you've been doing it for a while, you might pick up a few things by just looking at some of the resources that are being shared over there. Chris and I, we rely heavily on that website for our webinars here, just so we can get into sort of more of the meat of of these applications, and then any of the basics you can go back and just take a look at on this website.
And we do have a wonderful community in Australia and New Zealand of Google certified innovators. That's the kind of one of the areas that Jim and I fall into, and Google certified trainers, which Jim is also one of those. Jim has all of the Google certifications. And the Google educator groups have come together, and there are a bunch of us who are part of this anzgfecommunity.com. So if you want some one-to-one support, and you actually have got a really kind of specific question that you want someone to give you some support with, if you go onto that website there, you can register your question. And I have been jumping into the spreadsheet which gathers all of those questions. And at the moment, we're getting back to people within like an hour. So if you want someone to want support around G Suite and Chromebooks in particular, then please feel free to jump onto this wonderful community. This is not a Google product. This is not I guess, an official Google support line, but it's one of those things that when you become part of the kind of Google for Education family, we feel that it's important to stick together and to support each other. So please do jump onto that and have a little look if you have some specific questions.
Or if you're just tired of the two of us and you want to really get into something else.
There is that as well.
Yeah, it's there's a lot for us to cover here today. You can take a look at this agenda and just get a sense for where we'll get started. I know that right at the start, we're just going to kind of refresh your memory just about a couple of the things we talked about in our first Google Classroom webinar, and then we'll talk about a little bit about the customizing and things like that, and then we'll get into some of the more advanced features of Google Classroom today, and then. What I really am going to enjoy, Chris, is at about a half an hour in or so, we'll really dig in to what it looks like to create an assignment or create classwork that will impact hopefully your classroom, and you can adjust that for your own needs.
Yeah, so we're going to look at a learning design model, and we're going to there are lots of different learning design models. I know the Victorian department has in the past talked about the 5 E's model, for example. We're going to share a learning design model that Jim and I use when we're building our workshops. We're going to look at how we set up learning, how we help our learners to build their understanding, and how we get them to demonstrate their learning growth. And we're going to do that all through Classroom. So we're going to give you kind of, Jim in particular, some really brilliant technical expertise. He's going to share some of those tool features, and then we're going to put that into that context of what it looks like when we're using it for learning. So I am very excited too to share that. Before we kind of get into the rest of that, I do just want to revisit the learning design principles that we have in our minds when we're thinking about designing learning still at a distance in Victoria, certainly. And you know, we never get political on this show, so I just want to say well done to all of the teachers in all of the different states and territories who are dealing with schools being open. They're kind of closed and they're open, and it's a real can be a real challenge for us. But what we do know is that when we're designing learning in whichever context, we want to make sure that there's a strong connection with and between students and teachers. We also want to engage our students in collaboration around rich learning experiences. And we also want to see how can we make sure that our students are learning and thinking, and how can we make that visible in the online space. And as it is we do have a partnership with the department, well, not a partnership, but we are working to support the department schools. We are going to make reference often to the high impact teaching strategies, which, while coming from a Victorian departmental strategy, they are pretty universal. So essentially what we're going to do is to look at these different high impact teaching strategies within the context of learning, and to look at how the technology platform can amplify those things. And it's one of those almost a catchphrase that we say every time is technology is an amplifier of pedagogical practice. So we're not just here to tell you the nitty gritty of the Google platform, which is brilliant. We're actually looking at how does that apply to real learning and teaching and pedagogy in your context. So with that, Jim, I'm going to hand over to you to tell me all about how do I create and customize my classroom.
Well, thank you, Chris. You know, you could go ahead and share my screen if you don't mind. And we have we talked about this a little bit last time when we first did Google Classroom. And you know what, Chris, I was looking at this the other day, and I realized I never told anybody how to create a class. So I'll tell you, I'll just tell you really quickly. Just go over here to that plus button here in the corner and click on that, and then click Create Class. Boom, you're there. I just realized that we did all this last time we met, and nobody got past creating a class. So hopefully you figured it out by now, and that's why you're here today. You know, just a couple of things just to reiterate. A huge concern, I wouldn't say a concern, a big thing for teachers is the amount of emails you get from all of your classrooms. And don't forget, that's over here in that hamburger or hot dogs. And down on the bottom where it says settings, you can go in and just be sure you can adjust your settings there. You can tick that whole thing off and you get no emails at all, but I wouldn't recommend that. You can certainly turn off notifications for a particular class way down here. But just choose some of these options here just to sort of meet your needs. And don't forget to tell your students this too. I think you know, and I think I know, and I think they know that the more emails you get from that one source, the more you ignore them all. And last thing we want to do is be ignored in this situation. and from there. So be sure you do that. Make sure you go into that setting to make sure you tick all the right boxes, and then come into this class. So you might remember from last time that Chris and I created this class for you guys. I think Chris, we've been building on this classroom so much that I feel like I want to take this class. But we have a
fun class. Yeah,
that's right. And so you can go in here and just take a look. I'm just going to go ahead and bump this up full screen. I think this is about as big as I can get here. And then we can go over here to the far right and click on that cogwheel. There's some settings in there that you might want to tick. Maybe if you want to change your class or add some descriptions or whatever. Don't put the room. I think it's probably your living room, right? Then you can come down here under general, and just remember, last time we spoke, we talked about how we post to the stream, and that is an important feature here, because what you share to the stream is maybe what they're getting emails constantly about. Sorry, it's the wrong button. This one here. I think recommend that maybe you just use the stream to have conversations with your students, and really just use that as the learning comments, right? So I recommend maybe you hide all the notifications of classwork that you create, and then from the stream, use the stream for just how are you going, what's happening, and asking questions, and then soliciting response and conversation. You can do what you need to do. Just remember that if you put this top one here, that's everything. Everything gets shared in here. Some things don't get shared if you choose the middle one, but I'm choosing to hide them all. Okay. And then the other thing is here is to make sure that you're allowing kids conversation, or you're using the stream for something else, right? So you could just be posting to the stream and commenting on your own material. Or you can just be letting your students comment at the start. So you just don't want them posting anything. And then when you're ready and you sort of feel like you have the culture in your classroom to encourage those conversations and trust that your students are posting in that public voice, then you can tick on the top one, okay? Last thing is that down here we spoke a little bit about last time. I believe it's where we can turn on the Meet. This is a customized link. So as customized is supposed to work, that your students can't join the Meet until you're in there. And then when you wait till everybody's gone, they can't rejoin the Meet after about 30 seconds. And so you can go back to that last webinar to look at, but I think there's some important things here just to remind you of, okay? I didn't make any changes, so I don't have to save. And we come back in here. And the last thing I really want to remind us about is this customizing your header. And you can see here under this theme, I just picked whatever theme that they had. And that theme picks a color, and that color is what is the color of your tile, if you will, back here on this home page. And I remember telling you last time that a lot of teachers will color code their stuff by subject, especially if you're teaching in secondary. Just be aware of that. The other thing is here, you can upload your own photo. And I think I remember telling you at canva.com, you can just search for a Google Classroom template and add things like the times you're having office hours, or maybe the times that you're meeting every week face-to-face in a Meet, or something like that. You can customize this graphic so it shows all that information, so kids don't have to dig or look around for it. Okay, so those are just some things there for you to remember. And then, a second ago, and as a refresher, I said about how we use the stream for conversation. And Chris, we shared this last time, this what went well, even better if. But you know what I found recently today, Chris, that this article somebody shared just about instead of asking how are you, or how are you doing, this article that you can see, maybe you can see it there. I shortened it to bit.ly/20 HRU questions. So how are you questions? They are 20 alternatives to just the question, how are you? And I thought I put one here. It's just like, what part of shelter-in-place residence have you come to appreciate the most? So getting kids to reflect and maybe see the positive in things is one of the questions that they suggested that you ask, especially if you're checking on well-being. And I love that. I love the concept of that. And I actually hope that when we go back to normal, if we ever go back to normal, that we learn how to ask questions in that way. And you're right, JJ. JJ Abrams is always adding the right kind of comments in here. So that's just a refresher. Feel free to go back and watch what we shared before, but there's just so much great things. There's so many great things in here you can add, like these wonderings and, what do you notice and things like that, just to encourage that community in classroom that we don't necessarily have all the time now, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, I think that's probably just a nice little refresher just to help get us in the right place. And now today, I think, Chris, we'll start doing some new things, right?
Absolutely. So I think we're going to look in particular at that idea of grading assignments, rubrics, and grade books. I probably don't actually need the slides up right now, but the idea is that we're going to be looking up setting up some assignments, thinking about looking at the rubric tool and what a good rubric might look like, and also some feedback as well, thinking about things like private comments, grades, and the grade book. So there's a bunch of stuff in here that we're going to have a look at. And then, as Jim says, probably in about 25 minutes or so, we'll be looking at what does that look like as an example and actually building that example out.
That's right. I think some of the things to talk about really around topics is I saw some people using this and I thought it was really great. I think in the last webinar we did, Chris, around Google Drive, we talked about how you can add audio files into your slide deck as a way of providing instruction. And I found something online, somebody maybe shared this, is that even in here in our classwork, pages, we don't just have to add assignments. I think what we can do here is we can also post messages. And you can see here I have that audio file. I'm using Emojipedia to find these emojis to add into our topic headers, or the names of our topics. And but one of the things I think is really interesting is that you can come in here to create, and then in this case I might just pick material, and then I can come over here and just choose a particular student. So if I really want to just share something with Clarence, and I can do this individually for all my students. So I can just take Clarence and then put this underneath my messages topic. And then I might just say, week 4 or whatever, for some of you it's week 1, right? So let's just say this is week 3, I think, week 3 message. I could just go in here and record an audio file and then grab it from my Google Drive. And you know what I did, Chris? You know how I recorded that audio file? I used Screencastify.
Nice.
And it's and Screencastify, if you know, they're a great Google partner, and there's just a simple extension. Part of their free service now is you can export any screencast that you do as an audio file. So I just recorded my screen and then just export it as an audio file. And what I discovered is that it immediately saves to my Google Drive. So the audio file saves to Google Drive. I thought that was so cool. And
it is so neat.
And I can just post that directly to this one student, and I can individually give those kids attention with a very specific audio file. And of course, they get to hear my voice again, and they because they love that. And we can go from there. And it's I love that. So anyways, I think that's just something easy to do. Just coming over here and identifying which student to send that to. You can do that for all of them. You can just do that for some of them. But I think it would be really helpful to go through that. Yeah.
Jim, just on top of that, this isn't, by the way, everyone, this is not in our plan. But it just totally resonated with what Jim just said there. There is the Google Classroom app. So if you have your mobile device, so whether that be a tablet or a telephone, or whether you're using, let me think of the word now, whether you're using your Chromebook and you're using the Android app in your Chromebook, you can actually do a similar thing on the app, which is slightly different to the, what I'm going to ask you to do, Georgia, if that's all right, is just really quickly share what's called the slide screen, if that's all right. That would be awesome. Just because I think, Jim, actually, it didn't occur to me, but I think this is really useful to share, is that if you're using a Chromebook, you can use the Google Classroom app. So there is a Google Classroom app. The Android app is actually built into Chromebooks. And if I open that app, there is this, and I go into this distance learning piece here, and just exactly what you were saying there, Jim, is if I was to either do a post under messages or even just a normal post, it looks different. And in the app, what I get is I can put some text in there, but if I want to actually attach something and I hit the attachment button, it actually gives me the option to take photos and record video. And so if you wanted to even build on that messages idea and you're using your mobile phone, you can actually record video messages as well. And again, same thing, just send them to those specific students that you want to send them to. So rather than all students, I might only send it to one, and I can send them that message, that video message, using the mobile app as well. And just a really good reminder that Chromebooks, if you are using them, I know quite a lot of us are in Victoria and around Australia, a great device, and also gives you that mobile Android app version of Classroom as well, which allows you to do that. Sorry, Jim, for taking it off the
No, I love it. I think the app has so many cool features to it that it's definitely worth exploring. Anyways, I think there's just some great ideas for us to be, as I give myself credit for that idea. It's a great idea for you to be using these topics or just material instead of assignments inside of your Google Classroom. The other thing here that I posted, I may have talked about this last time, is I'm using a calendar appointments in my Google Calendar, and then I can take the link from my appointments slots and drop them in here. So any kid who really wants to work with me that week, I can give them a direct link to schedule an appointment slot with me. And then the rest of the things we might be able to come back into here. We talked about before this classroom recording. So as you're recording your face-to-face time with your students in Meet, save it in here. Take that and give them another opportunity to watch it. You don't have to watch it again if you don't want to, but it'd be great to be able to share that with your students. Okay.
Jim, we've got a question from Jacob here, and we covered this in our last webinar around using Google Forms, and I know that I think it might have been Heather who asked this question a little while ago about the best way to mark attendance each day. And we're probably not going to go into too much in the details, but the best way, and it's available on our previous webinar. And I'm sure we can find the time-stamped moment where that's available and maybe pop that into the chat, of using Google Forms to do that rather than using the questions or Classroom, because Google Forms will timestamp. And we know that one of the issues that people had was trying to do in Classroom, like mark yourself in, is that it's not timestamped, so kids might be marking themselves in after the moment, after the lesson, or after the check-in time. So Google Forms, and I think we'll try and get the timestamp link to that and put it into the chat. But this would be a perfect place to put it, right, Jim, with a topic or a topic over it being attendance, for example.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's great. I love the idea of the timestamp because I could come into it at any time and tick in and check in. And that may be fine with us too, right? We don't have to necessarily have you working at the time your class was in real life. So that's So using Google Classroom in the classwork section for other things is important. But I want to go in and talk about just a couple of things briefly as we move forward. In here, we have the regular assignment. We'll really spend a lot of time on that today. You can create new topics as you've seen there, but then also materials that really aren't graded. Materials is your way of sharing. And as you create topics, you might just front load them with some extra information or just resource materials for them to have access to later. And then there's a space here for asking a question. I think we covered that in the last one too. And then there's the quiz assignment, and this takes you into Google Forms. So I'll just give you a quick little tour of it. It starts creating a form down below. You can see that, and then automatically it says, "Hey, I'm going to import that grading." And we don't have to get into forms too much in this case, but I'll just give you a peek at it. It automatically turns on grading for you, right? So you can see that the answer key is already set up. So before we had to go into this cogwheel and turn that on, but in this case we didn't have to. I think it's in the cogwheel, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. It's in that quizzes. If I was just doing this normally, I'd use that, but it's already on. And so then I can start, doing my quiz questions here and then providing an answer key. And that, as soon as I change this to, this is my history quiz. It's like, I'll give it a more unique name, right? And then I just tick on this and it should take that. Look at that. It didn't do that for me. That's interesting. And then I go from here. And then once I've done that and I go back into my classroom, this will change. This name will change. Okay, so that way you don't have to worry about just saying blank quiz. And that's one way to do it. Once they've taken that self-grading quiz, the grade imports into your Google Classroom. Okay, so just some basics in there. If I have a play with that, that's a really cool assignment. And then we can go into here, and then we can also go into assignments, so the regular assignments. Let's click on that for now. Inside here in assignments, so this is where we'll spend a lot of our time today. But I want you to notice over on the far right-hand corner of our assignment, it's something called originality reports. And originality reports references or gives you access to, I don't know, is it machine learning? Is that what we would call it, Chris?
Yeah.
To go and look at your students' assignments and check it against the web. And it's actually a really cool feature that if you don't have Google G Suite Enterprise for Education, then you only get 3 of them. You can only use them in 3 assignments per class. And so don't fall in love with it. You know what I mean? But if you do fall in love with it, then just talk to your administrator or somebody at leadership, whoever is overseeing your Google Apps for Education domain or G Suite for Education domain. Then they can purchase that, and you have unlimited originality reports. We're not going to get into it too much today, but I want you to know as soon as you tick on that, it gives you a big reminder, like, hey, you have only 3, and if you this is it. And I think I've already used one, so I would have 1 left if I continue. But it's great. So students who write an essay for you you can actually run that report. It'll find any references, things that they've copied and pasted from the internet. And I've seen it. There's great videos on YouTube. You can actually see people burn one of their originality reports just for you to be able to see how that works and what that looks like in action. I don't know how much I would use that for especially when I was in the classroom, but I think a lot of teachers have been talking very highly about it. So feel free to take a look at that. And then another thing we won't get into too much detail about is the concept of guardians. And so you have to have this turned on at your domain level. And I've seen some schools, they don't have it turned on because they're using other ways to communicate with parents. But if you wanted to, you could come in here and invite a guardian. So you can invite somebody outside, like just enter an email address, and they get an email, depending on how often you want them to get an email. Or I think it's how often they've chosen to get the email. They get a summary, and I'll just sort of give you an example of it from the help menu. It looks like this, and they get this summary from email to them either weekly, or I have it turned on for this other piece once a day, and it shows the guardian what work is missing and what's coming up, and what that's why really due dates are really important, so the guardians can actually keep an eye on that for you as much as the kids should, right? And then just basic activity from the last week for that student's particular work. Okay, so they won't see the conversations that are taking place that other kids have shared. So there's that element of privacy. You can take a look at that. Just search guardians and classroom help, and you'll be able to find a lot more information about that. But for today, I don't think we're going to get into it too much. But outside of what I'm just sharing with you now. Okay, we'll go back into here. How are we looking with the questions, Chris? Are we okay to keep moving on?
We're good. There's one about notifications to students, about how you can send notifications to students automatically when providing feedback on an assignment. If they're on a device, if they're on a mobile device, then they will get that through a push. So they will actually get a notification on their mobile device that there is some kind of notification for them, whether it be around that. It is true, actually, though, Jim, if you don't use email, so the other main way is that they'll get an email saying that there's been, like, for example, the teacher has provided feedback on an assignment. If you're not using email, you actually have to go into the assignment and tell them, right? And sorry, so essentially tell the students to go into the assignment and look at it. So yeah. whichever. So you might do that in the stream. You might say, "Can everyone check there?" But so there's not an automated way unless you're using emails or push notifications. But Jacob and Heather, that is a really good feedback for the classroom team, and I genuinely recommend you to give that feedback to the classroom team. And anyone who uses any Google or any G Suite product can actually give feedback. And the way that you do it is there is on the bottom left-hand corner, Georgia, if we can just get rid of the thank you. On the bottom left-hand corner there, on any of the pages in Classroom, you'll see a question mark. And you can click on that question mark and you can do a request feature. And that is how all of the feature improvements in Google Classroom and in all of the rest of the G Suite products, genuinely that's how they happen, is lots of people request them. And Jim and I actually, and our team, we know one of the managers who literally sits and reads through every single one and prioritizes it for engineering teams. So yes, you can get automated emails and you can get automated push if you're on a mobile device. But you would have to go into the stream and tell kids to go and have a look at their feedback. So that is a really fantastic feature request. So do that, Jacob, please, and Heather, and we will hopefully see that coming soon in the classroom.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. It's I think they do a really great job of taking on that feedback. I also recommend doing it 100 times, and that way we get through it. I do not condone that. I was making a joke. Anyways, I think there's good stuff in there for us to be kind of let guardians have some access to what the kids are doing, right? And so let's just jump into a couple of things that I think are really great in here. Once you've given an assignment, for example, in here, let's say, for example, I say, hey, let's get an assignment. I'm going to have you write an essay. So I say to you, write an essay about elephants, and and then here I'll just bump it up a little bit so you can see it more under instructions. And it's and here's this is when being at home is taking its toll on you because you haven't left the house in weeks. That write an essay about elephants and make it a good one, and that's your only instructions, right? So you're letting kids go and write an essay, and you can go into here into student work. So once you've assigned that instruction, so maybe I should go back and just sort of show you again what that might look like in case you haven't seen it before. I go into assignment. I say, this is your elephant essay, and then and you write your instructions right here, right? So instructions go here, and you can be specific, right? You can come in here and you can add, maybe just link them to a reference, maybe like a newspaper article. You can take a PDF from your hard drive or something you found online, or even give them a link to a YouTube video and ask them to use it as a prompt, in some sort of creative writing. And then you can come over here and just be sure to pick the topic. Let's say that's week 5, and then you have your due dates, and remember that due date shows up there in that Guardian's email. So I do recommend using due dates for that reason. You can give a time if you feel like you need to, and then of course you can assign it as no points, or you can just change this number to whatever you feel like is good for you. Okay. Just another reminder here is you can go in and just choose one of these individuals. So you can actually you can change the dynamics of those questions to meet the needs of the student there. So if this is going to work for most of my students, that's great. I can just go ahead and send that. But I might want to tick just a few of them to get that particular set of instructions. But then I might want to choose, let's just say, for example, Floyd, and then I could add additional resources to help accommodate for that child's needs. And so that is unseen by the rest. So only that child sees that instruction in that way. They don't know that the other students didn't get that type of instruction, and no one knows that this particular child got that. So I think it's a great way to differentiate by just being able to provide more resources, or just maybe even just adjust the lesson and your expectations from that lesson for particular students. Okay, so I'm just going to mark all just so I make it send it out, and then of course I can come down here and add a rubric. And I like the idea of being able to add a rubric here by clicking, and I can create a brand new rubric, or I can reuse a rubric. Here's some, maybe I had this one here for just checking for originality or something like that. I can add that rubric in. And we can talk about rubrics a little bit more in a bit. And then I'm not going to put on that originality reports. I maybe might want to just save that for maybe the bigger summative essays that we might use it towards major grading periods, right? So that's how I would add that in there, right? So that's how I would create this assignment. And then I have created an assignment very similar to what I just showed you here in this write an essay. So once I've given out the assignment, you can see this is gray. That means I haven't given it out yet from my point of view. And then it's this blue. That means it's live, right? And you can see it's been assigned to the 7 students in my class. And then I can come here and view this assignment. And I can see these students who are out there. So I can go back into the instructions and look at this. I might even go in here and say, let me know if you have other questions or something like that. This is whole class. This class comments on their instructions is whole class. Many of you are worried about that capital E, so I'm going to fix that. And I'm going to go from there, and I'm just going to turn that in. Okay.
Thanks for that, Jim, because it was bothering me massively.
I could feel it. And then I go into student work, and now this is all my students who have been assigned this lesson, right? All right. And so in a minute, I normally this will show up here, but I can go in and take a look at how kids are working or moving along, right? You'll notice that I didn't give them a template. They have to go in and create that. Chris, do you want to show your screen, JJ, and see what that looks like on the student side?
Georgia, if we can just show the slide screen, that'd be awesome. Beautiful, thank you. So I'm looking at the same assignment that Jim has just given me in from a student point of view, from JJ Abrams' point of view. Now, obviously, when you and we're going to look at this and different ways to do this in a moment, you can attach templates that you want students to fill in, or indeed you might just give them the instructions, which are terrible, by the way. Jim, I've put a whole class comment in there just for telling us how bad they are.
Are you in character right now? Is that why you're saying that?
These are terrible instructions. So write an essay about elephants. So what I could do is I can go off and I can create a Google Doc in my Drive, and later on I can add it, or I can just click on this kind of button here, add or create, and I can either add something from our Google Drive, I'm going to add a link or a file, but in this case, I'm actually just going to create a new doc. And what that will do is it's going to create the new doc in here. It's taking a couple of seconds. Here we go. And I'm going to now write my essay. So as you can tell, because it's been created in Google Classroom, it's already appended my name, JJ Abrams, in here. And I'm going to write my essay. I'm going to give you the same quality essay as you gave me instructions. And that's elephants are cool. So that's it. And what you'll notice is on the top right hand here, I do have the option to, I'm just enjoying using the Zoom on my Chromebook, by the way. I just,
Chris, before you turn it in or hand it in, before you turn it in, can you, Georgia, can you switch back to my screen? There you go. So I now see, the rest of these students don't have, it says no attachments. But I can see like this blue sort of page here that JJ Abrams has. And now while JJ is working on it, I can actually go into JJ's essay. So if he's in there working right now, or I can go in after the fact. I can add some comments for him, and I think we talked about this a little bit the other day. And then I can come in and add a comment here. So this be like, click on this. There we go, and then I can say good work, something like that. I can be a lot more specific. And then just as a reminder here, I could also come in and tick on that. And remember, because I've set up comments in my comment bank, I can click on hash. And then here I can use some of these things that I've already put in here. And just like this. And then comment from my comment bank. And remember, our comment bank is right here. But this is a great way, especially if your kids are working during what you're calling class time, then you can be giving feedback to students I can just go through it. Up here, there's a little arrow. I can just keep going through to all my students and just keep working through as if I was walking the room and just providing that one-to-one instruction, that guided instruction throughout the process. So I really love the opportunity to be able to go into live documents and then provide that feedback.
That's a really great analogy, Jim, actually. The idea of, doing it like this is literally like walking around the room and looking at kids' work and having those conversations with them. And while Google Classroom, like if you've used Google Classroom from the beginning, it didn't have any assessment features in it early doors. Like it had nothing in it at all. The assessment features which have been added, which are great, are all about really, like there's a big focus on summative assessment. And we're going to look at that, and summative assessment is really important. But what I love what you've done there, Jim, is just showed such a powerful example of formative assessment and being able to give that feedback in the moment. Because one of the things, and just segueing back in, so George, if I can just get back my screen for the slide screen for a second. One of the features, and we've had a discussion about this before, is that when I turn in my elephant essay, so I click on that turn in button, I will actually lose my edit access to my essay, and it kind of gets handed over to the teacher. I have never liked this feature as a formative piece. Like I'm not sure if I can't see any value in me saying I'm handing in a piece of work and then you give it back to me, you give me feedback, you give it back, and then I work on it again, and there's a kind of back and forth. I much prefer using comments in the way you've just done, Jim, to do that formative piece. And then when I am done, I've had feedback, I'm ready for my final draft, then I'm happy to hand it in. And I think that for me, we've had the question before in one of the previous webinars about, how do I hand it in, then hand it back, hand it in, hand it back. I'm not sure there's a huge amount of value in that. I think you can do much more formative assessment using just simply comments.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I was just thinking, sorry, I was just thinking, should you be going to that feedback link and then clicking and entering that in? But I really do think that I like to think I like it, because it takes the ownership. So a student, when they create it, or when I've given the assignment, they're owners of that document, and I, as a teacher, I'm an editor. And then when the student hands it in, I become the owner, the teacher becomes the owner, and then the student becomes, I think, a viewer. And that way it just really stops them from making any final changes to it. Now, we could go in all day about why that is good and why that's not bad, right? But I do think I just think it's important to just know that you don't have them hand it in until it's done, right? Until you're ready to grade it. And so in this case here, if you're looking at my screen now, you can see out of all of the ones that are assigned that I have JJ who's handed it in. Now we think that JJ can be a problem child, but he's the first one that did all the work. And yeah, good job, JJ. And then I can go in there and take a look at it. I can match it up against the rubric. And I did notice, by the way, Chris, I don't know if you saw that I burned one of my
originality reports.
Originality reports on this particular project, and it says I have no flagged passages. So this originality report went through. So the work that you've done, that elephants are cool, guess what? Not on the internet. So that's great. Good work. And then I can go in here and I can give you a grade, but just know that in that particular piece, I can come down here and add private comments and say, this is great work. You've really improved your writing during this time, and it's great, and it's a great way for you and that student to have a private conversation. It's a great way to kind of encourage them to do things differently. This conversation, this private chat, doesn't just exist when they've turned it in or handed it in. It's at all times. So you could be guiding them in this private chat throughout the entire process, or in the doc itself, as we've just shown you. And then once that's done, I can come in here and I can get in, and I'm going to give JJ 45. I don't know, I'm just a tough grader, and I feel like, I don't know if it was like a full 50 points, Chris. And then I'm going to go ahead and send that private comment. You'll see the private comment will appear just underneath the work over here on the left. And then it's saying, hey, this is totally a draft, dude. Everything's like, you haven't really finished it, And so in this particular window, I can come up and I can actually select multiples and then apply return to all of them. Now, obviously, Alfred Hitchcock didn't turn anything in. So, but I can go in and return this work. Again, here's another opportunity for a private comment, and then I can return. And now the ownership goes back to J.J. Abrams, and we are good. We are good now. So yeah, I really enjoy this ability to move back and forth and do some grading. I want to show you very quickly. This is, by the way, my least favorite feature. Now that I'm in this grading window, where I'm looking at my student work and analyzing instructions, I just want to go back to classwork. So if anybody's out there watching and you know the direct way to go back to classwork, put it in there now, because I always have to go here.
Yeah, me too.
To here again. Like,
I thought it was just me. But maybe no. I thought I just couldn't find the right button.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about it, because I thought it was just me. And so so here we are. It's we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable in front of all these people, and you probably at home thinking to yourself, I thought it was just me. So it's all of us. Okay. You can see now when I'm looking at classwork in this particular set of instructions that J.J. Abrams is not handed in. He would be if I hadn't graded it and returned it to him. But in this case, now out of the 7 students, 1 is handed in and it's been marked. So you get the differences. So we're easily able to see where things are in our assignments. And so I've done this kind of work with Classroom with up to like 80 one time, and it's really interesting to see. I'm always looking at that assign to get it to 0, and not it doesn't always happen. So from here, and this is where I'll just sort of take a pause. Is if after this I'll go up here to marks, and here is where I can get it's like my grade book, right? And so I can take a look at where we are with this entire process. And so I had this one piece where here's a great a slideshow, create a slideshow, and I used a rubric for that. Maybe I can take up our time just to show you what that looks like. So under create a slideshow, I had them use the create button to instead of a template, as we've shown in other sessions. And then I applied a rubric, and just to give you an idea what that rubric looks like. It's I just simply made it a very easy one, probably not the best rubric in the world, but maybe using the sort of headlines, headers that you're familiar with. And then what I like about using this rubric is that when I go into the work, let's see if I can go into see something like this. When I go into the work, when I go to grade it, let's see if I can. Let me see if I can do this with what some of you have already marked. Maybe not. Yep, down here. Those rubrics, I don't have to remember what I wrote. I can just remember that it's this proficient and then satisfactory. So I just have to tick on this box and it automatically assigns that grade. You see how it's changing on my end? I really like this. And can you name the movie?
You could have multiple rows, right? As well, you might have multiple rows in your rubric. Yeah,
that's right. So you don't just have this one section, and it will accumulate all the grading for you. And so I just use a very basic rubric in this particular case. So I'm going to give in full credit again. So because I haven't changed the grade, I don't have to return it. Everything's back to normal. Does that make sense? So I love it. I love being able to use a rubric. I'm not a huge fan of rubrics in general, but you can see. So here you have an example. Here's J.J. Abrams. The rubric said that you had to have a picture and it had to be centered. And J.J. Abrams didn't do that. And then maybe, using a bad font. So I can come in here and just give him as proficient and then go from there. Where J.J. is sending me a note and I'm like, not really, right? And so I don't think we're modeling the best sort of teacher-student conversation.
This is bad, JJ. This is bad. You're bad.
No, it's okay, but it's and then I'm just going to return that to JJ, and everything's good to go, right? Because I've already made that comment. It doesn't have to ask me. So that's just another way of returning it from instead of being back here on this page and doing it. Okay. So that's I wanted to be able to show you that piece. I go back into marks. I think this is where we can see in marks the average for the class, and then I can even go into a particular student from here. I can come in over here and then look at a particular student. Let's just look at Alfred's grades. So here's Alfred's work. He has some things that were assigned. I don't do a lot of dates, but here he's missing this work because this was due back on the 24th. And so we know that Alfred's missing that. And then he's turned in this other assignment. So this can be a really easy way to see. And Chris, I think when you and I are talking about this, we both were like, oh yeah, the filters. Yeah. So we can come in and just see, get rid of all those assignments and just see what he's handed in, okay, and what he's missing. All right, that's from the marks, and so I think in other places it's called the grade book, but or grades, but in here it's called marks, and so we can kind of see the whole class as everything as a whole.
So Jim, just before we transition across to the next section, I do have a really great question from the wonderful Riley, who has joined us on webinars and is doing amazing work herself and has shared some beautiful science work she's been doing with us. She asked, can I enter marks into the grade book based on live assessments such as running records? So, for example, I think, and just off the top of my head, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, and Riley, I think what you'd have to do is to create an assignment which was like a reading record week 1 or something like that, or whatever it is, because I don't think you can manually add in columns into the grade book, into the mark book. But you could create an assignment which is called my reading record and leave it blank. And then, as Jim's showing you now, you can actually type into one of those cells. You could actually put a mark into one of those cells which has got a mark next to it if you wanted a mark. If you just wanted to put comments in it, what you can also do with the grade book, with the marks in the grade book, sorry, I'm losing the ability to speak right now, is you can actually use them to, and I'm just trying to find where it is, to export your grade book as a, what am I trying to say, Jim? A spreadsheet.
Some sort of spreadsheet. Now, where is that button, Chris? It used to be up here.
That's what I was just looking for. And I was like, I do know where it is. I've used it before, and I think it's moved.
I wonder if it's a setting that I didn't turn on here. Yeah, so here, so in here, overall mark calculation, so I can actually do a total points. And then, so overall mark to students, I can do that. I thought it was in here. This is where Googler would chime in.
Tell us the right answer.
That's right.
So basically what we're saying, I think, is, Riley, is that we'd use, you can use this to capture all of your data in here. And then you can export that as a spreadsheet and maybe capture your running records in a Google Sheet.
We think you can export it.
We're sure you can. Great. I think, well, we've got a support link, I think, and I'm sure that our wonderful Google for Education magical people in the background are going to help us to do that.
That's right. That's right.
That's strange. The other one, just a quick question from Keenan, and then we will move on. Keenan Lucas says that once the students are working on, so this was the elephant essay, where will it save in their drive? And we know that Classroom, so Classroom is magical, and it automatically creates a folder in each student's drive and in your drive, and it will place whatever you create in Classroom, whatever's created in Classroom, it will place that work into a folder called Classroom. In fact, it will place it into a subfolder inside Classroom based on the, have you got it there, Jim? Yeah,
yeah, this is that moment where you're wishing you weren't on screen, sharing your own personal private drive.
Everything's there.
It's just recorded right now for everybody to see. And then you go into, this is our distance learning folder.
So that's automatically named, the folder is the name of the classroom.
And then here's a write an essay, I think, in here.
Yeah. So that's my elephant essays in there, Keenan. So you don't need to go into Drive to access any of this. You can access all of it through that front end of Classroom, but that is where it lives in Drive. So yeah. Great question.
And you can see from my folders that my Classroom is red. I mean, stay out of there.
Don't mess with it.
Not even going in there. Just sort of, yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to get in that folder.
All righty. So what we're going to do now is just take a breath for a moment. I think we've managed to, thank you, Heather, click on the individual task and hit the 3 dots. Oh, yes. Sorry, we do have another question from Heather as well. Heather, you can archive a classroom, but the way I manage, so two things I do, which are maybe slightly different. And in fact, what we may as well do, if that's all right, is we can just jump across to my screen, my actual screen, not the slides for the moment, George. Thank you. Is that my screen? Yes, it is. That is my screen. Sorry. Is what I would do is when you're thinking about organizing your classwork is to, when you're doing your topics, and we mentioned this the other day, is maybe to create a topic which is called This Week or Urgent Tasks. And what I do is, or what I did when I was teaching the classroom, is I would have a topic which was this week. And for example, maybe the elephant essay. I'm just going to drag it up here. And I'm going to pop it into this week. There we are. And so I actually help the students to organize at the very top of their classwork. This is the important stuff that you need to do this week. And then once it's then I can disorganize it. I can put it back in there. And the other topic that I would make is archive. And so what that just helps to do is to clean up some of that. And I would put archive at the bottom, the very bottom of the page. And then what I might do is things like once week one's done, I might grab all of that and just drop it into the archive. So I need to grab it and put it under here, all the individual blocks and put them under archive. So I would kind of move everything down. You can archive a whole classroom, but at this point you can't archive individual assignments within the class work. So that's how I used to manage it, and it worked pretty well for me. Alrighty, so what we're going to do is we're going really well. I'm very excited about the next piece. And Georgia, if you don't mind, we sacked Jeannie Chris because he wasn't very good. And this week we have Jeannie Georgia, who is running all of the screens, and she's going to pop up the slides if that's okay. And what we're going to do is just very briefly, like in about 20 minutes or so, we're just going to explore what this whole game looks like. And Jim and I, we talk a lot. I'm very lucky. I get to spend a lot of time with Jim online, more so than when we weren't in lockdown. We did not spend anywhere near this amount of time together. But we hang out a lot, and we talk a lot about designing learning and what works for teachers and what works for students. And one of the things we discuss is like when we're designing, what are the design principles we use and what are the kind of models that we use. So there are lots of design models out there, things like, as I mentioned before, the 5 E's from the Victorian. I think it's not actually from the Victorian, but it was adopted by the Victorian department. But what I'm going to do is share with you a model that Jim and I think about. It's been used in lots of schools, used in lots of schools in the UK and schools in Australia as well. But this idea of a phased model, what does it look like? What are the different phases that I need to design for? Because what we want to explore is what's it look like when you're playing the whole game of learning in Google Classroom. And so when we are thinking about starting a learning experience or a learning moment with kids, we want to think of a hook. Like, what's the thing that is going to get those kids hooked into learning? In a school I used to work in, we call that an engager. Some schools call it a bell work, which is, i.e., what's the thing that when the bell rings, the kids are doing that's going to hook them into learning. How are you transitioning into learning? And if your hook is doing the role, I think you need to rethink doing the role, because that's not learning, unless you use the role for learning, which is obviously something you can do as well. But really, what's that thing that's going to get our kids engaged, thinking, and preparing them mentally for learning coming up? How am I going to share with them an overview and the learning outcomes? Like, how are they going to know where they're going? I don't want to give them everything right now. But I do want them to understand the context in which they're learning, because a really great thing I think I used to do, I don't know if it was great or not, but the thing I used to do a lot of as a leader in a school would be going into classrooms, talking to kids and saying things like, oh, what are you learning? And they'd often be able to tell me that. And I might say, how are you learning it? Like, what skills are you using? And they could tell me that. And I might say, why are you learning it? And the kids might just look at me and saying, well, because the teacher said I'm learning it. So what I'm interested in is really getting the kids to have some sense of agency and ownership and understanding of where they're going with their learning and what outcomes might occur. And whether we call them learning intentions or we call them learning outcomes, semantically slightly different, but a similar idea. How am I going to give input? And the default for that often in classrooms is, I am the teacher. I'm really good at French. Jim is really fantastic at making films. Like, we can give you some expert input. And that's definitely a role of the teacher. There's a really interesting new dynamic where that's probably much harder to do in the distance learning space, and much harder to keep students engaged. So maybe we can think about different ways to give input. What opportunities am I going to give students to construct their understanding? What activities are they going to have which will allow them to take that input I've given them and then do something with it, so that they start to move that information from their short-term memory and build it into the schema of their long-term memory. So getting to build and understand something. Now, as an educator and as a learner, I want to be able to demonstrate what I've learned. One of the most powerful things I think I've ever been involved in was an exhibition of learning at High Tech High in San Diego, where students are there on an evening and they're demonstrating what they've been doing. They have to have a real authentic audience for it, and they create something, build something that shows their learning. And for me, it was such a powerful experience to see that as a teacher. I could see the learning that the students had gone through, but also from a student's point of view, it really lifts that game and says, well, you're going to be showing your learning to a real audience. And now again, in the distance learning space, suddenly the world is our oyster, right? We can share students' work with their permission and all of the right thinking around it as widely as we want. And finally, I guess, and most importantly for me, in lots of ways, is reflection. And how do we get students to reflect on their learning so they become better learners? Now, you can go through this cycle in one learning experience. Like, if that was even an hour, you can go through this cycle. Or you might go through the cycle over a period of time. You might share a hook, do the overviews and outcomes, have some input, do some construction, go back to the overviews and outcomes, do some more input, maybe a bit more construction, and then get on to demonstration. So as with any kind of diagrammatical representation of something which is complex as learning, it's not perfect, and you're not going to just follow it without thinking about it, but it does give us those phases that we might want to consider when we are designing learning. And the other considerations, the big considerations in here are differentiation and challenge differentiations for support and challenge, and also agency and feedback, like how are we getting the students to really take this on, I guess. So what we've done, and Georgia, if you don't mind just jumping across to
my screen.
My screen, so the other my screen.
My screen. Go ahead.
They all look the same, right? So I am a teacher in the classroom. Oh, actually, sorry, Jim. You know what? Maybe it is your screen, right? Do you want me to? Yeah, it's okay. Georgia, I'm sorry. Everyone, I'm sorry. It is Jim's screen. And what Jim is going to do is he's going to show us a little bit around the kind of hook, which as a Geordie from the north of England, I find very hard to say, Jim. I don't know if you notice it, because I tend to say hook.
I have noticed that it sounds a bit different than me.
The hook. So tell me about the hook. What could I use as a hook in my Google Classroom, Jim?
So this is where I'm tempted to repeat you in your accent, but I'm not. So what I think is great is, we talked about topics, right? So what topics? How do you want to do your topics? And so, we showed you before, maybe the first webinar, that we like to do them in weeks. But then here, just another example, we're doing it with a unit, right? So this is maybe this week's unit, but we just started playing around. I watched a video the other day, and I've been stuck in 1920s New York for some reason, and so we built a lesson around it, right? What does that look like? And so, Chris, you just outlined all the things we were just talking about. So here it is inside Google Classroom, and so you can see this is an assignment. So I just hooked up here. I have the hook here, and in this particular unit, or this particular activity, I'm doing a watch, listen, and wonder. And so I have a video that I found of this great documentary about New York, where it's a video and a quote from The Great Gatsby. So one of the ending quotes from The Great Gatsby, and in part of that, so I wanted my students to sort of, what do you know about New York? Listening to this quote, maybe you have to look up some words or some things there, and then I have them access a shared document. So this document I've given to them where everyone can edit the same doc. And so I'll just give you a piece of it. So I used that quote there. Most of the long, big shore places were closed now. And this is where my students would go in and add their name and then their thoughts around the things I've asked them to identify, the filmmaker's use of sound and music, and then, what do you know about this? What is it? What are some of the things? So it's a great video, and it's just a great activity for them to kind of see each other's thinking, and to be able to collaborate in an open space. I've spoken before about when I'm using these collaborative documents, usually the first document I have them collaborate on is it doesn't have any high stakes. And so really not giving them the stress of a grade. And so in this case, it's just like, what do you know? What does your classmate know? Do you want to comment to that? That sort of thing. It's just I like it. So kids don't have to do anything except, write in this document. So you could give them a grade if you wanted to, if you want to give them some points. But this is also a great way to see who's doing work at live. So remember we talked about that attendance question. You could do it here, right? What kids did work on this? And you could, of course, look at the revision history of that. Go from there. So that's the hook, right? And so the next piece here would be the overview. And so in this case, I created a video. So I captured my screen, then I exported it out to another program. And so I actually, I have a video here that just basically starts off with me asking, telling them what's going on. So they just click on it. It comes into Google Docs, from Google Drive.
Hey everybody, and it's time for us to start looking at New York City in the 1920s.
And this is that day where you don't feel like you have to do anything with your hair or even wear normal you go for education clothes. And so
I'm super disappointed that you don't have some kind of trilby or at least like a fake 1920s mustache or a monocle. I feel you should have tried harder, Jim, on that.
That's right. Yeah, you could do whatever you want back there. I'm not trying to limit you, and I didn't want to stress you out by doing something fantastic here. Yeah, and so, and then of course in this space, Chris, I would add a reflection, add this reflection journal that we're going to come back to later on. And so they just open this up, and this is shared with them. Each kid gets their own. And Chris, I think you're going to talk more about this as we move forward.
Yeah, so one of the things we've mentioned before is when we're talking about learning outcomes, obviously we do talk about knowledge, and that's good, that's important, and we want students to develop their knowledge. But the other thing that we can really start to consider is, well, what are the mindsets we want the students to develop? What are the skill sets and what are the tool sets? And Georgia, if I can just get you to jump across to my screen for 1 second, my presentation screen, which looks the same as Jim's because we're in the same slide deck. What we've done is we've looked at knowledge, we've looked at mindset, we've looked at skill set, we've looked at tool set, and this comes from the work of Guy Claxton and Bill, whose name I can't remember, but his book's over there, so I should be able to look at it. Bill Lucas, Guy Claxton and Bill Lucas, and they talk about split screen learning outcomes or split screen learning intentions. So not only are kids developing knowledge, but they're also developing mindset, skill sets, and tool sets. And what we've done is we've thought about what's the knowledge, what are the students going to do? I can explain the socioeconomic context of New York in the 1920s. And obviously Riley and other amazing educators in the early years is you might not be using lots of words here. You might use images, you might use photographs of tasks. I can brush my teeth. You might just have a photograph or a thing there, depending on what the outcomes are. And what we are looking at is for the kids to own these and co-construct these a little bit more, is for the students to say, well, you know what, actually, I do know a little bit about New York in the 1920s because I've watched The Great Gatsby. So I'm going to put this one here, maybe down to like yellow and green. So you'll see that we've got a self-assessment traffic light down here. Have I created a powerful narrative of life in New York in the 1920s from one perspective? No, I have not. And can I evaluate, I forgot what it says there. Have I evaluated multiple sources to deepen my understanding of New York in the 1920s? Not yet. So I might actually get kids to have their own version of the learning outcomes that they can manipulate and they can actually give some reflection on. Am I thinking like a historian using sources? Well, maybe I've done a bit of that, but I'm definitely not right down in this green traffic light. The skill set here, and we won't go into this too much, we might have a look at this when we look at Google Keep to in our next webinar, I think it is, about going even further. I might have metacognition, reasoning, and questions, generating questions as a skill set, which comes from the general capabilities and from the Victorian capabilities. I might have them. Am I good at generating questions? Am I good at metacognition, reflection? How's my reasoning? And again, same thing with tools. So right away, we've got students thinking about being able to reflect on all of the different aspects of their learning. And just to pick up on Heather's question around reflection, is this journal is for the whole unit. This isn't just a one-off activity. So for example, might have first reflection here. They might do a what went well, even better if. Second reflection, they might do like a 2 stars and a wish. And you could date these, right? So everything comes within this one journal. And when we get to the reflect part of the kind of learning design model, we'll come back and look at the second part of this. All right.
Yeah, it's so good, Chris, and I think this is something we can be sharing. Even what was the document that you have before with your
the thinking canvases?
Thinking canvases, that bit.ly/thinking canvas, right?
Yeah.
It's just there's so many great things in here, and so just to sort of get us to a place where we can just take some final questions. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I mean, there's our input. We talked about that just a few minutes ago.
Our input might be as simple as, I've got a YouTube video, I've got a PDF about New York City, and 20 fascinating photos. And all I did is, you can see it has a different kind of label up here, which means it's just material. So there's definitely no assignment to it. It's just additional materials. I've put it under the topic here. And it's not just me. Now, it could be a video of me, and we could be having live synchronous lessons as well, and we will be. But here's some additional input. And if you think about maths, it could be a link to some Khan Academy stuff. Or if you think about doing something else, you might link to a TED Talk. Why not have experts who are, I mean, there aren't many of them, but imagine having people who are even better at Google Classroom than Jim and I. I think Heather, Riley are already better than us at this. But you could get the world's best experts and have them do your input just instead of you. Are you gonna? Oh, I'm gonna take us around constructing knowledge, Jim.
Yeah, we just have a couple minutes left to be able to share that before we have to close it up. Chris, where did the time go?
I don't know, mate. I don't know. So in terms of the construction, we might do things like a cause and effect. So we've seen these before. This idea that we can create a really nice cause and effect slide per student, so they can have their own graphic. I love graphic organizers, which I know you do as well, Jim. And also, or we could go, a little bit more. Certainly not pedestrian, but a little bit more kind of classical, I guess, and use some Cornell note style docs. So what's the topic? What are the questions and prompts? Take your notes down here, highlighting in red what you're not sure about, important points in green and quotes in blue, and then summary at the bottom. So we can do lots of different things. But what we're saying to you is the most important part is, whatever you design in this section, it's about the students constructing their knowledge, synthesizing the information that they've got. And how are they going to demonstrate that, Jim?
Oh, well, click on it, Chris. And it's I think this is one of my favorite pieces here. So in this case, and we've talked about this before, you want to give them opportunities to demonstrate their understanding in different formats, right? With different media. And in this here, I've linked to a few. We have video, so they could make a video. They could create a podcast where they're sort of interviewing people from the 1920s. And relating it to, maybe here in Australia, these Americans, and then, or even go so far as to create a VR story, right? Some virtual reality story. So obviously that takes a lot more work, but maybe a certain kid is really interested in what it looks like to have a 360-degree, image, and what would they do with that? And obviously the list could go on. There's other programs, but in this case, we're just giving them access to a way to just showcase their learning in their own way. And I love it as a teacher. Like, I may not know how to use Soundtrap, but the student can figure it out in this time that we've given them. And they come back with something that's just amazing and fun to grade, right? Just fun.
And indeed, like Jim, they might also say, actually, Mr. Sill, I know how to use this thing to make something. And that's another option in there as well. Yeah. So just to segue and sell our next webinar, the webinar about screencasting, is in terms of reflection, we've got a double-edged reflection here. We've got, in terms of your learning outcomes, record the video in your reflection journal, which I'll show you in 1 second. And we've also got this kind of just multiple choice. I am proud of myself and I have created beautiful work. I applied myself enough to finish the task, but maybe didn't apply enough to make beautiful work. my effort and application was low in this learning task and I'm disappointed by the outcome. Like we can do one of those really simple questions there. And just to segue into selling our fantastic screencasting webinar, which is coming up, is what Jim has showed you how he made a screencast to introduce this unit of work, but we can get students to do that as well. So they might have some rubrics or some growth ladders around the different skills they've used, which they've got in this. And I see that, Jacob, we can definitely share this out. I'm happy to do that. In fact, we might do it now. But also we've got a screencast. So I really want students, these reflections are all written, but why not get students who to use video? And what we're going to do is teach you how to use Screencastify in our upcoming screencasting webinar, so that students and teachers can create beautiful videos and embed them into slides as reflection, as materials, as all kinds of wonderful stuff.
And Chris, I just want to say that we probably have another half an hour worth of content. So Kimberly, could you just ask everybody to cancel their plans?
Just hang on, just cancel.
I'm not actually convinced that's the way it works. I think that's why we have a webinar series, though, Jim and Chris, because we can actually, I know you guys could continue to share these wisdom ideas literally all night, but other people have lives and may not want to stay all night.
What?
So I know, but that's why we like to chunk the material like we do in class, and we actually set different activities for different parts of the learning. With chunking.
Do you feel we're being told off here, Jim?
I feel like we're getting the hook.
Yes.
This is the hook to stop. Yes, it's the last couple of things. And then there is just a couple of questions about the reflection journals as well that I know, Chris, you saw Jacob's in there. I know Heather is also something about the reflection journal if you guys wanted to address that as we finish the webinar.
So really quick, Jacob, I've just shared into our chat the link to a view version of these slides. So please, you're really, really welcome to use them, make copies of them, and use them yourself. So I think one of our amazing people is going to put that into the chat, and we'll probably share that on Twitter as well. Heather, I've just understood your question, I think, which is you wanted to link like every week back to your learning journal type reflection thing. If you did it as an assignment, it would end up making a new copy of it, so that won't work. That's a really good question. I think, to be honest, it's maybe one of those automation pieces that isn't there. I don't know if Jim has a better idea. But
are we talking about that this? If we wanted this reflection journal that you've created here, Chris, we want to keep going back to it?
Yeah. So how would you keep going back to it?
I would probably put this in the stream. And then as more things appear in the stream, there's a little those 3 dots in the stream. You can actually move it to the top. And so get it back up there and just sort of keep it active, or at least keep putting it back up to the top every time you want kids reflecting on it.
And you could do a topic as well, I guess, in the classwork saying reflection journal. And I think so. I don't think you can automate it, because I think Heather wants to be able to reattach that to an assignment each week.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But every time you try to reattach it, I think it just makes a new copy if it's within an assignment. So, and then otherwise you'd have to have all the links like in a spreadsheet, and you'd have to do individual things. There's not an automation option, I think, and I think it's very much have to be, here's a notice, go into your reflection journal. It's in classwork under the topic reflection journal. Go back into it and maybe do that there.
Hey, Kimberly, can I share really quickly? Because while Chris was talking a bit ago, I discovered that if you go into each assignment in your classwork, that you can export the grade from there. There's a little cog wheel inside each assignment, and you can export your grade from your either into a Google Sheet or download it as a CSV, comma separated value file. So,
nobody actually knows what CSV stands for. That's very impressive.
Always there.
Just Google that one. All right. Can we go back to your slides, guys, and just put up the feedback link, please?
Yes.
As I said at the start, and as we reiterated, Jim and Chris are a wealth of knowledge, and we're really grateful that we have the opportunity to learn with them along this webinar series. And we have customized this specifically for the Victorian Department of Education teachers, but we know with lots of other people, and everybody is welcome. But all of that, we would really, really appreciate your feedback. It does genuinely help us to shape what the future webinars look like, what we can do beyond this time to continue to support teachers and leaders in schools. And we genuinely want to do that in the Google for Education team. So please, we'd love to get your feedback. So bit.ly/capital VICDET, capital W, webinars. I think I said that and realized that webinars is not really a word.
Right. Don't bother commenting that we went 4 minutes over. It's we'll just filter it.
You actually don't have editing access to the spreadsheet, Jim or Chris.
Yeah, we don't see them anyways, but I'm going to tell you, don't bother.
As you are filling in that feedback as well, we are coming back next Thursday. Oh, we're changing the day of the week next week. We're doing next Thursday and doing taking this to the next level. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next level is, because I feel like we're already at like
it's extensions and like Chrome stuff and all kinds of amazing kind of more add-on things. So going slightly beyond the core G Suite, but looking at some of those add-ons that we can use as well.
Awesome. Yeah, there are a whole lot of additional services that we actually can access through the admin console, as well as, the Google platform is very much somewhere where we work really closely with tech partners to enhance our products even more through using APIs. So there is a whole lot of cool stuff you can do beyond just the stuff that Google ourselves build. So come back and join us next Thursday if you are interested in that, or sign up and receive the link to watch it later, which is all accessed. You can actually see when you go to the registration page, there is an entire tab that says past webinars where you can access these. And Jim, you spoke about Teach from Home at the start, I believe.
I did.
So just a reminder. Just a reminder, that is our temporary hub of all resources during this time. We also have the amazing Teacher Center. There is a distance learning course on there that you can access. YouTube is pushing out all this amazing education-related content at the moment, including, Australia's most famous teacher, Eddie Wu, has done a whole series on there. Eddie has a whole lot of great ideas, and we do have our newsletter as well. So lots of ways to tap into continuing the learning beyond the hour and a bit that you spend in this series itself. So with that, Jim or Chris, anything final thoughts? You are slightly over time, so they have to be brief.
I feel like we were on time, and then you took 6 minutes to tell us.
Massively. If you can't get enough of, I'm just going to use this time right now. If you can't get enough of hanging out with Jim and I, come back at 8 o'clock tonight, when we will be running an Online Together AU webinar, sharing lots of stories from teachers around Australia and overseas. We actually have David Price, OBE, the very interesting educational thinker. Go onto Twitter, look up Online Together AU, and come and join and hang out with us for some more time this evening.
Nothing else to do.
Nothing else to do.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much to everybody who joined in live or is watching this and repeat whenever and wherever you're doing that. If you are an educator or a leader in a school, we are eternally grateful for what you're doing for the young people globally at the moment. And thank you for pioneering this really unusual time in education and bringing along the Google tools on that journey, because we're really grateful to be able to support you the best that we can. So have a great evening, day, afternoon, whenever you're watching this. Stay safe, and we will see you again soon. Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.